Welcome back to the 615 Sessions podcast. Joe Rexrode is here. Steve Layman will join us at some point. Of course, you can hear Joe on 102.5 The Game, Robbie and Rexrode, 6 to 10 a.m. every weekday morning, and read him in theathletic.com. All right, so you do local radio. I do local radio. Has your entire week been just burn all the shit down the way that mine has? Because it's been toxic.
Well, maybe not all the shit, but burn down anything that has number 17 on it would be, and anything with Downing on it. That's mostly been, it's like whose fault, who's at bigger fault? You and I have argued about that, by the way.
I was about to say, it's your fault that they're pissed at Tannehill. It's your fault.
Oh yeah. Oh man. No, it's been, and then of course you get into, first of all, just the misery of that loss, the culpability, and then you get into the fantasy scenarios of fixing it, which I don't know. I'm interested to know what you think about that, Buck.
Well, what I think about it is that the more time that we spent on this, as Steve Layman of News Channel 5 joins us now. Steve, we were just talking about how our two day jobs with Sports Talk Radio have just been burn all the shit down, basically on the offensive side of the ball. And how I feel about it is that the quarterback sucked, but the offensive coordinator, with the opportunity to prove us all wrong and to give us this pick your poison offense, just kind of shit the bed a little bit.
I mean, I think that's totally fair there, Buck. By the way, I'm pulling a U and doing this from the inside of my car this afternoon. But
the car pod is underrated. Listen, it's all about convenience, Steve.
That's right. I just had to pull off the side of the road because I was stuck behind an oversized load that I couldn't get around to get home. So, but we're all good. No, I think that's totally fair criticism about Todd Downing. I will say in his defense, he didn't have most of those weapons together for much of the year. So he didn't have the chance to really see a chemistry built where you had Derrick Henry running wild and then you had the play action built off of it. But this was as healthy as they were ever going to be in the postseason. All the expectations were there. And that was a totally uncreative, not very imaginative offense that we saw. And it didn't put Ryan Tannehill in the best position to succeed. Now, he's got to do better given what was called and what was in front of him. But some of those calls were just atrocious. I mean, and not just the calls themselves, but the way the offense is. This is not just it was a bad call on this particular play at this particular time against the Bengals. It was a accumulation of 18 games. Like that Mike Hilton interception. I don't know if you guys have hit on this throughout the course of the week or not, but that is a basic concept that the Titans call. It is a run or a pass based off of what the defense lines up in. So it was called as a run, but if they line up in a certain thing, it automatically checks to a pass. Well, guess who knew that? The Bengals. And guess who really knew that? Mike Hilton. He knew if he lined up where he was, given the defense, that was going to get checked into the screen to Chester Rogers. He's on a cornerback blitz. He has no designs at all to go after Tannehill. He is absolutely making a beeline to put his hand up and get a paw in front of that pass out to the screen, and it turns into an interception. That's a tendency thing that the Titans did throughout the course of the year that the Bengals studied up well, and they made a play on it. That's not necessarily Tannehill or Downing in that spot, but that's the offense as a whole, which comes back to Downing. You could say the same thing on 3rd and 1 later on. That zone read, if you know the Titans and that personnel group, that's a zone read every single time. And the Bengals obviously knew it. Zach Taylor taught Ryan Tannehill how to run the zone read. So they were totally clued in there. To me, this was much more about the tendencies of the Titans offense throughout the entire course of the year than any particular play call or any particular play.
Rexrode, I'm going to let you defend your boy Downing here in just a second. But with the way that I look at this, the problem for me is they've been doing this. This is 4 years of them looking some form or fashion like this style of offense, right? It's the way they're built. They're playing to their personnel. But the further we get away from Arthur Smith and what makes Arthur Smith Arthur versus Todd Downing with basically the same fundamental play calling principles, the tendencies are just different. Like the way that I'm thinking about this, Rex, is at some point they have to make a decision if they are going to continue to play this way and the Bengals get better and Patrick Mahomes looks more efficient and Josh Allen seems to be like getting close to the peak of his freakish powers. Can they legitimately keep up playing the style of football that they are currently content to play?
Yeah, that's a fair question. Look, and those are all great points on Downing, and I agree. And I just, it's one of those things where it's almost like it's something where it's hard to put your finger on. You just knew when you watch an Arthur Smith called game, it's like, look, I could never direct you a good movie, but like I know a good movie, right?
Yes.
And I'm like, man, that was really well done. And you can see he kept that defense off balance. And I did not feel that enough at all from Todd Downing. I felt like they were too predictable overall this year. There were weeks that were better than other weeks, right? But I'm still going with this game. With all that said, like, I'm sorry, I'm still going with the guy who, and that play is I think the most excusable. But the other two picks by Tannehill, like, I mean, if you do that and you look at the circumstances of this game, really the only way you lose this game is if that player does that. You still win this game and are playing Sunday if that player doesn't do what he did. So I've still got to start with him and be really concerned about how tight he looked, how locked in, how tunnel vision he was, and I think it was this season as well, way more than we had ever seen it from Tannehill, which I have to assume has something to do with protection, but also does it have something to do with the change of partnership? Going from Smith to Downing, I would have to think so, right?
Not based on what Mike Vrabel had to say to your question specifically.
Which was no. I couldn't believe that he didn't expound on that for 5 minutes on the differences.
It's the biggest upset, not even playoff football related. Steve, I mean, at what point do they kind of reevaluate and self-scout this thing? And say, he doesn't have to be the solution long-term. Like it literally just has to be for next season. Is there nothing else that they can do to kind of prop this guy back up again and get him closer to the version of 40 total touchdowns that we saw in 2020 without these egregious errors? Because Rexrode's right. Like, they played several of those games this year, and Ryan Tannehill against zone coverage was wretched all season.
Yeah, no, there's no question about it. I think there's a couple parts to this answer. Number one, I don't know what you'd have to see to believe that when you actually get into January and playoff football, that Ryan Tannehill is the guy that's going to lead you past Patrick Mahomes or Josh Allen or now Joe Burrow in this division, because you just haven't seen it. Even in the AFC Championship run of 2 years ago, it wasn't him. It was Henry running like a maniac through the playoffs that got them to the AFC Championship game. I was kind of like Rexrode in the whole camp of, I would defend Tannehill to like anybody around the country and say, look at his numbers through the regular season and look how much he's winning. I think he can do it because he doesn't have to be Patrick Mahomes. But after watching this game over the weekend, I'm not sure it's there. I'm not sure he can be good enough for 2 or 3 games in the playoffs to get the Titans where they ultimately want to be. That said, to your question about next year, yeah, I do think there's a few things can happen. One, you got to imagine the offense is going to be healthier next year than it was this year. And if he gets better protection up front throughout the entirety of the season and has Julio Jones, A.J. Brown, and Derrick Henry out there for most of the season, I think he's automatically going to be better. The second thing is, and this probably has to do with whatever they do personnel-wise at tight end, but the offense, while very similar, had one very stark difference this year. Their base offense for the last few years under Arthur Smith was 2 tight ends.
Yep.
They were 12 personnel the majority of the time. The base offense this year was 11 personnel with 3 wide receivers on the field because they didn't have enough at the tight end position to do that, I assume. If they can fix that and get back to that and be a little bit more base, run Henry more effectively throughout the entire season and build off of that in play action, where clearly Tannehill was at his best over the last 2 years, I think you can be better. And then you throw in the big play aspect of hopefully AJ and Julio healthy. I think there is a chance this offense could take a significant step next year just by the simple fact of being healthy and maybe changing around the personnel groupings a little bit. That said, though, even if Ryan Tannehill throws for 30 touchdowns and 8 interceptions next year during the regular season, when they get into a divisional round playoff game against one of those guys we just mentioned earlier, who are you taking? Which quarterback are you picking in that game? Because after what I saw last weekend, I mean, he's middle in the pack in the AFC amongst the contenders in terms of quarterbacks I would trust in a postseason game.
Yeah, I think the evidence, it's enough at this point, right? Because they got to the playoffs twice now. They've hosted home playoff games, and the opponent, where they've been able to maybe not run at will all season long, they've gotten to the postseason twice, and the opponent has said, no, this is the last game potentially of the season. You're not going to run the football, and the quarterback's going to have to beat us. And against Baltimore and against Cincinnati, the quarterback literally just could not beat the opponent once they took the running game away. And they had what, almost 140 rushing yards in this game.
They ran some.
Yeah, they ran fine. They tried to do what they did. And they, like he said after the game to all of us in this Zoom and to everybody else that was in the press conference, well, we didn't make enough plays to make the game. And I'm sitting there screaming in my head, no, you literally did. You just blew it. You just blew it.
Yeah, I mean, and that's the thing is, what about internally here? I mean, look, no one will ever say it, but if I'm Amy Adams Strunk, if I'm John Robinson, if I'm Mike Vrabel, if I'm any player on this team, you telling me that there's not a little bit different feel about Ryan Tannehill now than there was 1 week ago today going into this game?
Discernibly, at least in that locker room, there's a different feeling around him. They're going to publicly pick him up because they need him. But I'll tell you for damn sure, there's a different feeling about Ryan Tannehill right now.
There has to be. So it's a tough situation. There's always the fantasy scenario of going to get someone else. I mean, have you been dealing with that, Buck? Have you been talking through the Russell Wilson, Aaron Rodgers, Deshaun Watson? Who else?
I've gotten way too many Deshaun Watson calls this week. I've gotten way too many Deshaun Watson. All of a sudden, the guy throws 3 picks and you want to bring an alleged sex offender in here to come play quarterback who won 4 games the last time he was on a football field. Go ahead, Steve.
That one is definitely not happy. That one absolutely is not happy. I can't see based off of the finances how any of them happen, but who knows? Maybe John Robinson can pull a rabbit out of his hat. To your other question, though, and what Joe was hinting at, I think even some of the answers we've heard from guys hint at the fact that they're frustrated with how Tannehill played in this game. Because all season long, when he had a rough game, they stood up and they're like, oh no, he's our guy. It's just a bad day, or we all got to be better. And they hinted at that here, but there were some guys who were like, I'll leave what I told him off the table here. He's our guy, but we all got to play better. There was a hint of the answers this time around that definitely left you feeling, all right, maybe they're not as sold on this guy, or maybe they're a little bit more frustrated about the way this game played out than before. And I mean, that's going to be something else that they're going to have to deal with next year, probably for the first time, really, is Tannehill's going to have to sort of win over the locker room again at the beginning of the season. And once again, even if he has a tremendous regular season, there's going to have to be a little level of doubt, probably in everybody in that locker room, and maybe most importantly, his own mind when he goes into the playoffs next year, that can I actually do this? And how much pressure is on me to do it and to prove it? They're going to have to work through all of that next year.
Well, Rexrode, I thought that was probably Vrabel's most honest moment on Monday when he wasn't shitting on your question, was when he was asked about Ryan Tannehill, and he said, there's toughness there. He's got the accuracy at times to make the plays that we need him to make, but he literally said we need to be great around him. You need everybody else to be great around him. And I think we were all, all cognizant of limitations with Ryan Tannehill, but this brings it into a much, much different light.
Yeah, there's signs that he can complete passes from time to time. No, he didn't say that, but there's signs of accuracy was interesting. Yeah, and look, so and I think he's right. I mean, it was definitely like in the moment, I took it as a pretty strong endorsement of Tannehill, but certainly if you go back and listen to what he said about Downing, what he said about Tannehill, there's a difference.
Mm-hmm.
But he's right. I mean, they've got to get a tight end. I totally agree with Steve. They were a 12 base team, and I think it was very effective for them. And I think maybe you're right that it's the tight end situation led them to that, but I think it was the plan too when they got Julio Jones. I think that they thought that they would be better in 11. Josh Reynolds came from the Rams, a heavy 11 team. I think that they had a different vision for what it would look like with different
and
guys.
in fairness, we never really saw that with a healthy team either. Like, if all those guys are healthy the entire year, who knows? Maybe we're talking about an incredible offense off of 11 personnel, but we never really got to see that.
Yeah.
Right. So they need a real tight end. I mean, they need a legit tight end that we can look at and say, okay, that is their tight end moving forward. I think they need to go back to that. They need another receiver. They need a receiver again who can stretch a defense the other way. And to me, if you want to be great around them, you need to be just about the damn 85 Bears on defense next year. I mean, if we're talking about actually being still in a window to make a run, and then Todd Downing has just got to have a way better offseason and season. He's got to be way better on his own and with Tannehill.
Yeah. Well, and, I mean, realistically, based on where the contract status of Derrick Henry is, you probably got one more crack at this thing with like real Derrick Henry, or as close to that version as the post-foot surgery Henry is going to look like. Steve Layman of News Channel 5, somewhere on a highway, pulled over to the side of the road. Thank God. We want Steve to be safe. On his way, I'm sure, to call 75 Belmont basketball games, where, of course, you can hear him on the call. You can hear Joe Rexrode 6 to 10 a.m. weekday mornings on 102.5 The Game. Robbie and Rexrode, second for a reason, although you should go read his off-season to-do checklist article at theathletic.com, because he says Harold Landry is the priority, and I would say to you that he's wrong, but you can still read him anyway. Thank you. Thank you, guys.
Ooh. I want to debate this more, but thank you. We can debate this later.
You're the one who has a meeting. We'll do another podcast. Bye, guys.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Yeah.